Part 1. When everything falls apart, the cold December wind cut through downtown Chicago like a knife. Robert Chen pulled his old coat closer to his body as he walked down the empty street. His shoes had holes in them, and with each step, the freezing water from the melted snow seeped through to his socks. But the cold in his feet was nothing compared to the emptiness in his stomach. 3 years ago, this same man had stood on the stage of Carnegie Hall in New York City. Thousands of people had clapped for him. Newspapers called him the piano genius of our time. Rich people paid hundreds of dollars just to hear him play. His fingers could dance across the piano keys like magic, creating music that made people cry tears of joy. Robert had grown up poor in a small apartment above his grandmother's Chinese restaurant. His grandmother, Lin, worked 16 hours a day to keep the restaurant running. She had saved every penny for years to buy him a small, used piano when he was 7 years old. "Music will take you places I never could go," she had told him with tears in her eyes. She was right. By the time Robert was 15, he was already playing with professional orchestras. Music schools from around the world wanted him. He got a full scholarship to study at one of the best music schools in America. His teachers said they had never seen natural talent like his. When Robert turned 25, he released his first album. It sold millions of copies. Soon, he was traveling all over the world, playing in the most famous concert halls. Tokyo, London, Paris, Vienna. Everywhere he went, people loved his music. He bought a big house in the hills outside Chicago. He married a beautiful woman named Catherine who worked as a doctor. They had 2 children together, a son and a daughter. Life was perfect. Robert had money, fame, and a loving family. He thought nothing could ever go wrong. But life has a way of changing everything in just one moment. It happened on a Tuesday morning in March 3 years ago. Robert was at home practicing for a big concert that weekend. He was working on a very difficult piece by Chopin, one that required both hands to move independently with incredible speed and precision. His fingers were flying across the keys when suddenly everything went wrong. The left side of his body went numb. The room started spinning. His left hand stopped working completely, and he fell off the piano bench onto the floor. Catherine found him there 20 minutes later when she came home for lunch. "Stroke," the doctor at the hospital told them. A blood clot blocked the flow to part of his brain that controls movement on the left side of his body. At 59 years old, Robert was told that he might never play piano the same way again. The doctors weren't sure how much movement he would get back in his left hand. "We'll do physical therapy," they said, "but you need to prepare for the possibility that your playing days might be over." Robert spent 6 months in rehabilitation. Every day he worked with therapists trying to get his left hand to work normally again. He practiced simple exercises, trying to move his fingers one at a time. It was frustrating and painful. The hand that had once played the most complex music in the world could barely pick up a pencil. His left hand did get better, but it never fully recovered. He could move his fingers, but they were slow and clumsy. He couldn't play the fast, complicated music that had made him famous. When he tried to play his old pieces, it sounded terrible. His timing was off. His left hand couldn't keep up with his right hand. The concert bookings started getting canceled. "We're sorry," the concert halls would say. "Maybe when you're feeling better." But everyone knew the truth. Robert Chen, the piano master, was finished. The money problem started 6 months after the stroke. Robert's medical bills were enormous. Even with insurance, the costs of therapy, special equipment, and ongoing treatment ate through their savings quickly. Catherine was working as much as she could, but her salary alone wasn't enough to pay for their big house and expensive lifestyle. They had to sell the house first. Then the fancy cars. Then Catherine's jewelry. Piece by piece, everything they had built together disappeared. The worst part wasn't losing the money or the house. The worst part was watching his family fall apart. His son, David, was 17 when the stroke happened. He had been proud to tell his friends that his father was a famous pianist. After the stroke, David became angry and embarrassed. He stopped bringing friends home. He spent most of his time away from the house. "Why can't you just get better?" he would ask his father. "Why can't you play like you used to?" His daughter Lisa was only 14. She tried to be supportive at first, but as the months went by and the family's situation got worse, she became distant too. She was at an age where what other people thought mattered a lot to her. Having a disabled father who couldn't work was embarrassing for her. Catherine tried to hold the family together, but the stress was too much. She was working 60 hours a week at the hospital to pay the bills. When she came home, she had to take care of Robert, who was often depressed and angry about his condition. She had to deal with the children who were acting out because of the stress at home. "I can't do this anymore," Catherine finally told him one evening, 2 years after the stroke. "I love you, but this isn't working. The kids and I need stability. We need a normal life." She filed for divorce a week later. She got custody of the children. Robert was allowed to see them every other weekend, but as time went on, the visits became less frequent. David was busy with school and preparing for college. Lisa was busy with her friends and activities. They made excuses not to come see him. Catherine remarried 8 months after the divorce was final. She married another doctor from the hospital where she worked, a man who could provide the stability and financial security that Robert could no longer give her. The children seemed happy with their new stepfather. He could afford to take them on vacations and buy them things that Robert couldn't. Robert moved into a small studio apartment in a rundown part of the city. His disability payments were barely enough to cover rent and basic groceries. He tried to find work, but what could he do? His whole life had been music. He had never learned any other skills. He applied for jobs at music stores thinking maybe he could teach or repair pianos. But when potential employers found out who he was, the famous pianist who couldn't play anymore, they felt sorry for him. They treated him like a charity case. Some offered him jobs out of pity, but Robert's pride made it hard for him to accept their sympathy. He tried giving private piano lessons from his apartment, but students didn't want to learn from someone who couldn't demonstrate the pieces properly. Parents would bring their children for a trial lesson, but when they saw Robert struggling to play simple songs, they would make excuses and never come back. The loneliness was the hardest part. Robert had spent most of his adult life surrounded by people, other musicians, concert promoters, fans, journalists. His phone used to ring constantly with invitations to events, requests for interviews, offers for concerts. Now his phone sat silent for days at a time. His old friends from the music world had disappeared. At first, some of them called to check on him and offer support. But as it became clear that Robert wasn't going to recover and return to performing, the calls became less frequent and eventually stopped altogether. In the competitive world of classical music, associating with failure wasn't good for anyone's career. Robert started drinking to numb the pain of his losses, not heavily at first, just a glass of wine with dinner. But gradually it became more. Drinking helped him forget, for a few hours, what his life had become. It helped him sleep when the anxiety and depression kept him awake at night. The drinking made everything worse. He missed his physical therapy appointments. He stopped taking care of his apartment. He stopped shaving regularly or doing laundry. When David and Lisa came to visit, they were shocked by how he looked and how he was living. Their visits became even less frequent. Robert's disability payments weren't enough to cover rent, food, and alcohol. He started borrowing money from old acquaintances, promising to pay them back when his situation improved. But everyone knew his situation wasn't going to improve. Eventually, people stopped lending him money. He lost his apartment 6 months ago when he couldn't pay the rent. The landlord was patient at first, but after 3 months of missed payments, he had no choice but to evict Robert. Everything Robert owned, his remaining clothes, his books, his awards, and photos from his performing days, fit into 2 suitcases. Since then, Robert had been staying in cheap motels when he could afford it, and sleeping in his car when he couldn't. His car was, an old sedan that Catherine had let him keep in the divorce. It was 15 years old and barely running, but it was better than sleeping on the streets. Last week, even the car had broken down. The repair would cost more money than Robert had, so now he was truly homeless, carrying everything he owned, in a backpack and staying at the city shelter when there was space available. The shelter was a difficult place for someone like Robert. Most of the other residents were younger men with drug addictions or mental health problems. They were often loud and sometimes violent. Robert tried to keep to himself, but it was hard to find peace or privacy. The shelter had rules about when you could come. Part 2. The Moment of Shame. The bell above the door chimed as Robert pushed into Murphy's diner. The warm air hit his face like a gentle hug after hours in the cold, but the comfort was short-lived. Every conversation in the restaurant stopped. Every head turned to look at him. Robert immediately felt out of place. The diner was clean and bright with red leather booths and checkered floors that had been mopped until they shined. The smell of hamburgers and coffee filled the air. Normal families sat in the booths, parents with their children, elderly couples sharing dessert, teenagers laughing over milkshakes. Everyone looked warm, fed, and happy. And then there was Robert. His old winter coat was stained and torn. His jeans had holes in the knees. His shoes were falling apart, held together with duct tape. He hadn't showered in 3 days, and he knew he smelled bad. His gray hair hung down past his shoulders, and his beard was wild and unkempt. A little girl in one of the booths pointed at him and whispered something to her mother. The mother quickly pulled the child's hand down and shushed her, but not before, giving Robert a look of disgust. Other customers were staring too, some openly, others trying to be subtle about it. Robert heard whispered comments. Homeless. Disgusting. Someone should call the police. Behind the counter stood a man in his 40s with thick arms and a round belly. His name tag said Danny Murphy, an owner. Danny was wiping down glasses, but he stopped when he saw Robert. His expression immediately hardened. "Hey," Danny called out loudly, making sure everyone in the diner could hear him. "You can't be in here looking like that. This is a family establishment." Robert's face burned with embarrassment, but he was too hungry to leave. He had walked for hours in the cold, and this was the only restaurant he had seen that might be affordable. More importantly, he had noticed something when he first looked through the window. An old upright piano sitting in the corner near the back of the diner. "Please, sir," Robert said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not looking for trouble. I haven't eaten in 2 days." "Well, that's not my problem," Danny shot back. "You got money because I don't run a charity here." Robert reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. It was old and worn, but it had once been expensive leather. Inside, he had exactly $3.47, not enough for even the cheapest item on the menu. "I don't have enough money," Robert admitted, his voice getting quieter. "But I could work for food. I could wash dishes or clean tables or—" He looked toward the piano in the corner. "I could play music for your customers." The diner erupted in laughter. It started with Danny, who threw his head back and laughed, like Robert had just told the funniest joke he'd ever heard. Then other customers started laughing too. A group of college students in one booth began recording with their phones, thinking they were about to witness something hilarious. "You?" Danny said between laughs. "Play piano? Look at yourself, man, you can barely stand up straight. You think anyone wants to hear music from someone who looks like they just crawled out of a garbage can?" More laughter filled the diner. Robert felt his face getting hot with shame. He wanted to run, to disappear, to be anywhere but standing, in this bright, clean restaurant where everyone was staring at him like he was some kind of circus act. But his hunger was stronger than his shame. He hadn't eaten a real meal in days. His body was weak and his head felt dizzy from lack of food. He needed to try, even if it meant enduring more humiliation. "That piano over there," Robert said, pointing to the corner. "It just needs someone to play it. I could play something nice for your customers while they eat. Music makes meals more enjoyable." Danny followed Robert's gaze to the old piano. It had been in the diner for years, left by the previous owner. Danny had thought about getting rid of it many times, but it had become part of the decoration. Customers sometimes asked about it, but nobody ever played it. "You know what?" Danny said, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "I'll make you a deal. You play something good, and I mean something really good, and I'll give you a free meal. Our biggest dinner, with dessert and coffee. But when you fail, and you will fail, you get out of here and you don't come back. Deal?" The college students were definitely recording now. One of them whispered to his friends, This is going to be so funny. We'll put it on social media. Homeless guy thinks he can play piano. Robert looked around the diner. Every face was staring at him with a mixture of amusement and disgust. They were all waiting for him to fail, to make a fool of himself for their entertainment. Part of him wanted to leave with whatever dignity he had left, but another part of him, a part that remembered who he used to be, felt a spark of something he hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't quite confidence, but it was close. It was the memory of confidence. "Okay," Robert said quietly. "I'll try." Danny's grin got wider. "Great. This should be good. Everyone, quiet down. The homeless maestro is about to give us a concert." Robert walked toward the piano on unsteady legs. With each step, he felt the weight of every stare, every smirk, every phone camera pointed at him. The college students had moved to a table closer to the piano for a better video angle. The little girl who had pointed at him earlier was watching with wide eyes. The piano was an old upright model, probably made in the 1960s. The wood was scratched and faded, and several of the keys were yellowed with age. Robert ran his fingers lightly over the surface, feeling the familiar texture of piano keys under his touch. "What's he doing?" someone whispered. "Just play something already." Robert sat down on the small bench in front of the piano. It was wobbly and too low, but it would have to do. He placed his hands on the keys and immediately felt the difference. Between this piano and the concert grand pianos he used to play, this one was out of tune, with several keys that stuck when pressed. But it was still a piano, and Robert still remembered how to play. The problem was his left hand. For 3 years, he had been living with the reality that his left hand would never work the way it used to. Physical therapy had helped, but there were limits to what could be restored after a stroke. His left fingers were slower, weaker, and less coordinated than his right. He couldn't play the complex pieces that had made him famous, but maybe he didn't need to play those pieces. Maybe he could play something simpler, something that would work with his limitations instead of fighting against them. Robert closed his eyes and thought about the music he wanted to play. He thought about his grandmother, who had saved every penny to buy him his first piano. He thought about the years of practice, the joy of discovering new pieces, the feeling of losing himself completely in the music. He thought about the concerts where he had felt connected to something larger than himself, where the music had flowed through him like a river. And then he thought about everything he had lost: his career, his family, his home, his dignity. All of it was gone, but the music was still there somewhere inside him. Different than before, damaged maybe, but still real. Robert opened his eyes and began to play. He chose Clair de Lune by Debussy, a piece he had learned as a teenager. It was beautiful but not technically overwhelming. More importantly, it was a piece that could be adapted for someone with limited use of their left hand. Robert had spent many hours over the past 3 years figuring out how to modify classical pieces for his condition. The first notes were tentative and soft. Robert's right hand carried the main melody, while his left hand provided gentle, simple accompaniment. It wasn't the way the piece was supposed to be played, but it was musical and it was beautiful. The laughter in the diner began to fade. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. The college students who had been recording for social media found themselves lowering their phones, forgetting about their video as they listened. Robert's playing wasn't perfect. His left hand sometimes hesitated, and there were a few wrong notes when his fingers didn't respond as quickly as he wanted them to. But there was something in his playing that transcended technical perfection. There was emotion, depth, and a kind of pain that made the music more beautiful, not less. As he played, Robert forgot about the stares and the cameras. He forgot about his hunger and his embarrassment. He forgot about the 3 years of loss and humiliation that had brought him to this moment. He was just a man at a piano, making music, doing the thing he had been born to do. The melody filled the small diner, floating over the tables and wrapping around the customers like a gentle embrace. The little girl who had pointed at Robert earlier was now watching him with fascination instead of fear. An elderly man in a corner booth had tears in his eyes. Even Danny, who had been expecting a spectacle of failure, found himself listening with growing amazement. Robert modified the piece as he played, adapting it moment by moment to work with his physical limitations. Where the original called for rapid passages that his left hand couldn't manage, he created new harmonies. Where complex fingerwork was required, he found simpler but equally beautiful alternatives. It was like he was composing and performing, at the same time creating a new version of an old masterpiece. The music told a story. It spoke of beauty and loss, of dreams and disappointment, of falling down and trying to get back up. Every person in Part 3, The Truth Comes Out. The woman walking toward Robert was Dr. Helen Rodriguez, a retired music professor from Northwestern University. She was 72 years old, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. Dr. Rodriguez had spent her entire career teaching classical music, and she had attended hundreds of concerts by the world's greatest pianists. "Maestro Chen," she said again, her voice shaking with emotion. "I heard you play at Orchestra Hall 6 years ago. You performed Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 with the Chicago Symphony. It was the most beautiful performance I've ever heard." Robert looked up at her from the piano bench, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and pain. For 3 years, nobody had called him Maestro. Nobody had recognized him or remembered his music. He had begun to wonder if his successful career had been real or just a dream. "That was a long time ago," Robert said quietly. "I'm not that person anymore." Dr. Rodriguez sat down in the chair next to the piano, not caring about her expensive coat or whether the seat was clean. "You just proved that you are still that person," she said firmly. "What you just played was extraordinary. Different from before, yes, but extraordinary." By now, everyone in the diner had their phones out. Some were searching for information about Robert Chen, reading about his career and trying to understand how a world-famous pianist had ended up homeless. Others were sharing videos of his performance, posting them on social media with captions like, "You won't believe what just happened," and "This homeless man is actually a famous musician." Danny Murphy stood behind the counter, his face red with embarrassment and confusion. 20 minutes ago, he had been laughing at what he thought was a crazy homeless man. Now he realized he had just witnessed a private concert by one of the greatest pianists alive. He didn't know whether to apologize or hide. A young woman at a corner table raised her hand tentatively. "Mr. Chen, I'm studying piano at DePaul University. My teacher has played your recordings for our class. She says you're one of the greatest pianists of the last 50 years. What happened?" Robert looked around the diner at all the faces staring at him. Some looked curious, some looked sympathetic, and some still looked confused. These people wanted to know his story, but Robert had spent 3 years trying to forget his story. Talking about it meant reliving all the pain and loss. But maybe it was time. Maybe keeping the secret had been harder than sharing it would be. "I had a stroke," Robert said simply. 3 years ago, it damaged the part of my brain that controls movement in my left hand. I lost everything after that. Dr. Rodriguez nodded encouragingly. "Tell them," she said softly. "They should know." Robert took a deep breath and began to tell his story. He told them about the morning when he was practicing and suddenly couldn't move his left side. He told them about the months of rehabilitation, trying desperately to get his hand to work normally again. He told them about the canceled concerts, the financial problems, the divorce, losing his children and his home. As he spoke, the diner became quieter and quieter. People stopped looking at their phones and started really listening. The college. Students who had been ready to mock him looked ashamed of themselves. The families with children held their kids a little closer. "I tried to keep playing," Robert continued. "But I couldn't perform the pieces that people expected from Robert Chen. My left hand was too slow, too weak. Critics said I should retire, with dignity instead of embarrassing myself. So I stopped performing." "But you can still play beautifully," said the young piano student. "What you just played was incredible." Robert smiled sadly. "Thank you. But the music world doesn't have much patience for disabled pianists. When you can't play Rachmaninoff and Chopin the way you used to, people lose interest quickly. There are always younger, healthier musicians ready to take your place. An older man at a nearby table spoke up. So you lost your career. But how did you end up here? Like this? He gestured at Robert's torn clothes and unkempt appearance. Robert continued his story. He told them about watching his family fall apart, about his wife remarrying and his children becoming distant. He told them about the drinking, the missed rent payments, the eviction. He told them about sleeping in his car until it broke down, about staying in shelters and going days without food. The hardest part wasn't losing the money or the fame, Robert said. The hardest part was losing my identity. For 50 years I was a pianist. That's all I knew how to be. When I couldn't play anymore, I didn't know who I was. Dr. Rodriguez wiped tears from her eyes. But you did just play beautifully. You adapted that piece in ways I've never heard before. You found a way to make it work with your limitations, and it was gorgeous. It's not the same, Robert replied. I can play simple pieces, but I can't perform the repertoire that made me famous. I can't play concerts or make recordings. I'm just a broken-down old man who used to be somebody. A teenage girl at a table with her family raised her hand. Mr. Chen? I've been playing piano for 8 years and I have arthritis in my hands. My doctor says it's going to get worse as I get older. I was thinking about quitting because I'm afraid I won't be good enough if my hands don't work perfectly. But listening to you play, maybe I don't have to quit? Robert looked at the girl with surprise. He had been so focused on what he couldn't do anymore that he hadn't thought about what he could still offer others. What's your name? He asked. Ashley, the girl replied. Ashley, I've spent 3 years feeling sorry for myself because I can't play the way I used to. But maybe that's not the right question. Maybe the question is, how can we make beautiful music with the hands we have, not the hands we wish we had? Dr. Rodriguez leaned forward. Robert, have you thought about teaching? Not just giving private lessons, but really teaching? Sharing what you know about music and about overcoming challenges. Who would want to learn from me? Robert asked. I'm a failure. You're not a failure, Dr. Rodriguez said firmly. You're a survivor. You've been through something terrible and you're still here, still making music. Do you know how many students would benefit from learning from someone who understands struggle? The college students who had been recording earlier approached the piano hesitantly. One of them, a young man with red hair and freckles, spoke up nervously. Mr. Chen, we want to apologize. We were recording you because we thought it would be funny. We were going to post a video making fun of you. We're really sorry. Robert looked at the young man and saw himself at that age, confident, privileged, unaware of how quickly life could change. It's okay, he said. You didn't know. Actually, said another student, a young woman with short black hair, we were thinking, what if we posted the video anyway but told your real story? People should know who you are and what happened to you. Maybe it could help other people who are going through hard times. Robert considered this. For 3 years, he had been hiding from his past, ashamed of what he had become. But maybe there was power in telling the truth. Danny Murphy finally found his voice. Mr. Chen, I owe you an apology. I was cruel to you and I'm ashamed of how I acted. Please let me get you that meal I promised. The biggest dinner on the menu, and it's on the house. Thank you, Robert said. I am very hungry. As Danny hurried to the kitchen to prepare food, other customers began approaching Robert. They wanted to shake his hand, to tell him how his music had affected them, to share their own stories of loss and recovery. Dr. Rodriguez stayed by his side, and as the bank crowd around the piano grew, she had an idea. Robert, I want to make you an offer, she said. I run a community music program for people who can't afford private lessons. We have students of all ages, many with physical challenges or learning disabilities. They need a teacher who understands that music isn't about perfection. It's about expression and joy and healing. Would you consider working with us? Robert was quiet for a long time, thinking, I don't know if I'm ready for that. I don't know if I'm good enough anymore. What you just played proves you're good enough, Dr. Rodriguez replied. But more than that, what you've survived proves you have something valuable to teach. Not just about music, but about resilience and finding new ways to create beauty when the old ways don't work anymore. The teenage girl with arthritis, Ashley, had been listening to their conversation. "Mr. Chen, would you really teach people like me? People who can't play perfectly?" Robert looked at Ashley and saw the same fear in her eyes that he had been carrying for 3 years. The fear that physical limitations meant the end of music. But maybe it didn't have to be the end. Maybe it could be the beginning of something different. "Ashley, perfect technique isn't what makes music meaningful," Robert said. "Emotion makes music meaningful. Honesty makes music meaningful. The fact that you struggle with your hands doesn't make your music less valuable. It makes it more human." Danny returned from the kitchen with a plate piled high with food, a cheeseburger, French fries, onion rings, and a piece of apple pie. The smell made Robert's mouth water. He realized he couldn't remember the last time he had eaten a real hot meal. "Eat," Danny said. "And Mr. Chen, I have a proposition for you too. That piano has been sitting in my corner for 5 years, just collecting dust." Part 4. A New Beginning. 2 weeks had passed since that night at Murphy's Diner, and Robert's life had changed in ways he never could have imagined. The video that the college students posted had been shared thousands of times across social media. But unlike the cruel viral videos that often spread online, this one told a story of hope and resilience that touched people's hearts around the world. The video showed Robert's performance, but more importantly, it told his story with compassion and respect. The students had written about the dangers of judging people by their appearance, about the hidden struggles that people face, and about the power of music to transcend circumstances. Comments poured in from viewers who had been moved by Robert's story and inspired by his courage to keep making music despite his challenges. Robert was staying in a small apartment above Murphy's Diner. Danny had insisted on giving him the space, which had been used for storage for years. It wasn't fancy, just one room with a bed, a small kitchen, and a bathroom. But it was clean and warm and private. For the first time in months, Robert had a place to call home. Dr. Rodriguez had been true to her word about the teaching opportunity. She ran a community music program called Music for Everyone in a converted warehouse on the south side of Chicago. The program offered free music lessons to people who couldn't afford private instruction, children from low-income families, adults with disabilities, elderly people who had always wanted to learn an instrument, immigrants who were learning English and found that music helped them communicate. On this particular morning, Robert was getting ready for his 3rd day of teaching at the program. He had showered and shaved, and Dr. Rodriguez had taken him shopping for some new clothes. He looked like a different person than the homeless man who had stumbled into Murphy's Diner 2 weeks ago. But the real change wasn't in his appearance. The real change was in how he felt about himself and his future. His first student was waiting for him when he arrived at the music center. Her name was Carol Williams, and she was 68 years old. Carol had always dreamed of playing piano, but she had spent her life working 2 jobs to support her family, and had never had the time or money for lessons. Now that she was retired, she was finally pursuing her dream. "Good morning, Mr. Chen," Carol said with a bright smile. "I practiced what you taught me yesterday. Would you like to hear?" Robert nodded and listened as Carol played a simple version of Ode to Joy by Beethoven. Her fingers were stiff with arthritis and she played slowly, but she played with such joy and concentration that Robert felt moved by her performance. "That was beautiful, Carol," Robert said. "How did it feel to play it?" "Like magic," Carol replied. "I can't believe I'm actually making music. My grandchildren are so excited that Grandma is learning piano. They want me to play for them at Christmas." Robert worked with Carol for an hour, teaching her some new finger exercises and helping her learn the next section of the piece. He found that teaching adults was different from his limited experience with children. Adults brought their life experiences to the music in ways that made every lesson unique and meaningful. After Carol left, Robert's next student arrived. This was Jamie Martinez, a 12-year-old boy whose left arm had been injured in a car accident 2 years ago. Jamie's arm had healed, but he had limited mobility in his left hand, a challenge that Robert understood all too well. "Hey, Mr. Chen," Jamie said, as he sat down at the piano. "I figured out how to play that song you showed me, but I had to change some parts because my left hand can't do the fast stuff." "Show me," Robert said. Jamie played a simplified version of Für Elise, but he had adapted it in creative ways that Robert hadn't thought of. Where the original piece required complex left-hand work, Jamie had found ways to use his right hand to play both melody and harmony. It was ingenious. "Jamie, that's excellent," Robert said. "You're learning to be a composer as well as a pianist. Do you realize that what you just did is exactly what professional musicians do when they arrange music for different instruments?" Jamie's face lit up. "Really? You mean like the people who write music for movies?" "Exactly like that," Robert confirmed. "You're taking existing music and making it work in a new way. That's a very valuable skill." As they worked together, Robert found himself sharing techniques he had developed for playing with his damaged left hand. He showed Jamie how to use the sustain pedal to create the illusion of two hands playing, when only one was doing most of the work. He demonstrated how to modify fingerings to work around physical limitations. "Mr. Chen," Jamie said during a break, "in their lesson, my mom said you used to be really famous. She showed me videos of you playing in big concert halls. Do you miss that?" Robert thought about the question. A month ago, he would have said yes without hesitation. He would have said that he missed everything about his old life. The applause, the recognition, the feeling of being important. "I do miss some parts of it," Robert said honestly. "I miss the music itself, the feeling of playing beautiful pieces. But you know what? Teaching you and Carol and the other students here gives me a different kind of satisfaction. When I performed in concert halls, I was sharing music with people, but it was one-way communication. Here, I'm creating music with people. We're learning, together." After Jamie's lesson, Robert had lunch with Dr. Rodriguez in the small kitchen at the music center. They talked about his progress as a teacher and about plans for expanding the program. "Robert, I have some exciting news," Dr. Rodriguez said. "I've been talking to some people at the Chicago Department of Cultural Affairs. They're interested in creating a program specifically for musicians with disabilities. They want you to help design it and possibly run it." Robert was surprised. "They want me to run a program? But I'm just getting started as a teacher." "You're not just a teacher," Dr. Rodriguez replied. "You're someone who has lived through the experience of becoming disabled as a musician. You understand the challenges in ways that healthy, able-bodied people never could. Plus, you have the musical credentials to give the program credibility." That afternoon, Robert had a group class with 5 teenagers who were all dealing with various challenges. There was Ashley, the girl with arthritis who had spoken to him at the diner. There was Marcus, a 16-year-old who had been born with cerebral palsy and could only use his right hand effectively. There was Isabella, whose hearing was damaged in one ear, making it difficult for her to hear harmony and rhythm clearly. There was Tyler, who had autism and found social interaction difficult but connected deeply with music. And there was Jennifer, who had depression and anxiety so severe that she had dropped out of high school. "Today, I want to try something different," Robert told the group. "Instead of working on individual pieces, let's create something together, a group composition where everyone contributes according to their abilities." The teenagers looked uncertain. They were used to traditional lessons, where they learned existing pieces note by note. "Marcus, your right hand is very strong," Robert continued. "You could play the melody. Ashley, even with your arthritis, you have excellent rhythm. You could play a simple bass line. Isabella, your good ear is extremely sensitive to pitch. You could help us with harmonies." For the next hour, the group worked together to create an original piece of music. It was simple, just a basic melody with chord progressions, but it was theirs. They had made it together, each person contributing what they could. When they finished playing their composition, the room was silent for a moment. Then Tyler, who rarely spoke in group settings, said quietly, "That was really cool. We made that." "Yes, you did," Robert agreed. "And it's beautiful, because it includes all of your different strengths and perspectives. Music isn't about being perfect. It's about expressing something true and sharing it with others. After the group lesson, Robert walked back to Murphy's Diner for dinner. This had become his routine, teaching during the day, then playing piano, for the dinner crowd at the restaurant. Danny had been right about his customers loving the music. The diner had become busier since Robert started playing regularly, with people coming specifically to hear him perform. But more than that, Murphy's Diner had become a community gathering place. Regular customers would request their favorite songs. Children would sit near the piano and sing along. Elderly people would tell Robert stories about the music of their youth and ask him to play songs that brought back memories. Tonight, there was a special guest in the audience. Robert's son David had called earlier in the day and asked if he could come hear him play. It would be the first time they had seen each other since Robert became homeless. David arrived just as Robert was finishing his first set. He was 20 years old now, a college student majoring in business. He looked uncomfortable as he sat in a booth near the back of the diner, clearly struggling with seeing his father in this environment. During his break, Robert approached David's table. "Thank you for coming," Robert said simply. "I saw the video," David replied. "Mom showed it to me. I couldn't believe. I didn't know things had gotten so bad for you." "I didn't want you to know," Robert admitted. "I was ashamed." They talked quietly for a few minutes, catching up on David's life and studies. Part 5. Full circle 1 year later, Robert stood backstage at the Chicago Cultural Center, adjusting his tie and taking deep breaths to calm his nerves. Tonight was the biggest performance of his new life, not because of the venue or the audience size, but because of what it represented. The Chicago Adaptive Music Program, which Robert now directed, was hosting its first annual showcase concert. Students with various disabilities would perform alongside their teachers and mentors, demonstrating that music belongs to everyone, regardless of physical limitations or challenges. Robert had come so far from the broken, homeless man who had stumbled into Murphy's Diner asking to play for food. The program he now ran served over 200 students across the city. He had been featured in national magazines, had given talks at music conferences, and had consulted with schools around the world about creating inclusive music education. But tonight wasn't about his achievements. Tonight was about his students. He peeked through the curtain at the audience filling the auditorium. There were families, music teachers, city officials, and reporters. In the front row, he saw Dr. Rodriguez, who had become not just his mentor but one of his closest friends. Next to her sat Danny Murphy, who had closed his diner early so he and his wife could attend. Most importantly, in the third row, he saw his children. David was there with his girlfriend, and Lisa had driven up from college for the concert. Robert's relationship with his children had healed slowly over the past year. They still struggled sometimes with the pain of the years they had lost, but they were building something new together. Catherine was there too, sitting with her new husband. It had been awkward at first when she reached out after seeing the news coverage about Robert's program, but they had managed to have coffee together and talk about their children and their shared past. The anger and hurt were still there, but they were beginning to fade, replaced by a kind of peaceful acceptance of how their lives had changed. "Mr. Chen?" A small voice interrupted his thoughts. It was Lucy, the little girl from Murphy's Diner who had sung along when he played children's songs. She was 7 now and had been taking piano lessons with one of Robert's colleagues for 6 months. "Hello, Lucy," Robert said, kneeling down to her level. "Are you ready for your performance?" Lucy nodded enthusiastically. She was wearing a pretty, blue dress and had a small flower in her hair. "I practiced every day just like you taught me. Mommy says you're famous now." Robert smiled. "I'm not famous, sweetheart. I'm just a piano teacher who's very proud of his students." The first half of the concert featured individual performances by students. Ashley, now 18 and preparing for college, played a beautiful arrangement of Clair de Lune that she had adapted for her arthritic hands. The audience was moved to tears as they watched her fingers, sometimes slow and careful, create something breathtakingly beautiful. Jamie Martinez, now 13, performed his own composition, a piece inspired by his love of video game music. He had learned to use technology to layer different sounds, creating a rich musical experience that worked around his physical limitations. The piece was modern and exciting, showing that adaptive music didn't have to be limited to classical repertoire. Tyler, the autistic teenager, had progressed remarkably over the year. He performed a complex jazz improvisation that showcased his unique musical mind. His social skills had improved through music therapy, and he was now helping to teach younger students. Each performance told a story of overcoming challenges, finding new ways to create beauty, and refusing to let limitations define what was possible. During intermission, Robert mingled with the audience. A reporter from the Chicago Tribune approached him for an interview. "Mr. Chen, a year ago you were homeless and unknown. Now you're running one of the most innovative music programs in the country. How does it feel?" Robert thought carefully before answering. "A year ago I thought my story was over because I couldn't do what I used to do. I've learned that sometimes the end of one story is actually the beginning of a better one." "Do you ever miss your old career? The concert halls, the fame, the recognition?" "I miss the music," Robert replied honestly. "But the music didn't disappear, it just found new forms. When I see Ashley adapt a piece to work with her arthritis, or when Jamie composes something completely original, or when Tyler uses music to connect with other people, that's music too. Maybe it's even more meaningful than what I used to do." The second half of the concert featured group performances. The finale was a piece that the entire program had worked on together. Students, teachers, and volunteers all contributing according to their abilities. It was called Many Voices, One Song, and Robert had composed it specifically for this diverse group of musicians. The piece began with a simple melody played by the youngest students. Gradually, other voices joined in. Instruments, voices, even non-traditional sounds made by students who couldn't play conventional instruments. Some students played triangles or shakers, others hummed or sang. A few who couldn't use their hands effectively provided rhythm by tapping their feet or nodding their heads. The music built layer by layer until the entire auditorium was filled with sound. It wasn't technically perfect. Some notes were missed, some entrances were late, some rhythms were uneven. But it was joyful and inclusive and deeply moving. As the final notes faded, the audience erupted in applause. But something even more beautiful happened. The performers began applauding each other. Students cheered for their friends, teachers hugged their pupils, and families wiped away tears of pride and joy. Robert stood at the piano, looking out at the auditorium full of people celebrating music in all its forms. He thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment, the stroke that had seemed like the end of everything, the years of loss and struggle, the night at Murphy's Diner when he had almost given up hope. After the concert, there was a reception in the lobby. Robert found himself surrounded by students, families, and colleagues, all wanting to share their excitement about the evening. "Mr. Chen," said Jennifer, the teenager who had struggled with depression and anxiety when she first joined the program, "I wanted to thank you. A year ago, I couldn't even leave my house most days. Tonight, I performed in front of 300 people. Music saved my life." "No, Jennifer," Robert replied. "You saved your life. Music was just the tool you used to it." Dr. Rodriguez approached with a glass of champagne. "Robert, I have some news. The National Endowment for the Arts wants to fund expansion of your program to 10 more cities. They're calling it a model for inclusive arts education." Robert was overwhelmed. 10 more cities, that's incredible. "But Dr. Rodriguez, I never could have imagined this when you first offered me a chance to teach." "That's the thing about new beginnings," she replied. "You never know where they'll lead." As the evening wound down, Robert's family gathered around him. David and Lisa both hugged him tightly. "Dad, I'm so proud of you," Lisa said. "Not just for tonight, but for everything you've built this year. You've helped so many people. And you've shown us what real strength looks like," David added. "Losing everything and then finding a way to help other people, that's courage." Even Catherine approached him before leaving. "Robert, I want you to know that I'm sorry for how things ended between us. I was scared and angry, and I didn't handle it well. What you've accomplished this year, Owen, it's remarkable." "We both did what we thought was best at the time," Robert replied. "I don't blame you for anything. I'm just grateful that we can be civil now, for the children's sake." After everyone had left, Robert found himself alone in the auditorium. The custodial staff was cleaning up, but they let him sit at the piano for a few minutes before they needed to lock up. He played quietly a simple melody that came to him in the moment. It wasn't a famous piece or a complex composition, just a gentle tune that expressed what he was feeling: gratitude, peace, hope. A year ago, he had thought that losing his ability to play perfectly meant losing his identity as a musician. Tonight, he understood that being a musician was about much more than technical skill. It was about using music to connect with people, to heal, to bring joy, to create community. His students had taught him that there were many ways to make music, many ways to be valuable, many ways to matter. Ashley had shown him that beauty could exist alongside imperfection. Jamie had demonstrated that creativity could flourish within limitations. Tyler had proven that music could be a bridge between isolation and connection. As Robert closed the piano and prepared to leave, he thought about tomorrow. There would be more students to teach, more programs to develop, more ways to share the transformative power of music with people who needed it. He thought about Murphy's Diner, where he still played twice a week. Danny had framed the newspaper, articles about Robert's program, and hung them on the wall near the piano. But Robert's favorite part of playing at the diner wasn't the recognition. It was the regular customers who requested their favorite songs, the children who sang along, the elderly couples who danced slowly to his music. Walking out into the Chicago night, Robert reflected on how completely his understanding of success had changed. Once, success had meant sold-out concert halls and critical acclaim. Now, success meant Ashley,